This might be my favorite video that I've made in a long time. So we're going to talk about how I qualify a motivated land seller. And to be honest, I think that this is like one of the biggest disconnects between finding success in this business and lacking success in this business. And for whatever reason, I've never, ever heard any other video coach, course, whatever, talk about what I'm going to share here. So stick around. Should be interesting. The thing is, like, everyone looks at, is a seller motivated based off of just the one-dimensional nature of price. Hey, I made an offer. What was their response? Black and white. It was a yes or a no. That means they're qualified or unqualified. Or same thing. It's like they want $1 million. The property is worth $500,000. So therefore, they are not qualified. Instead, though, what we do inside of our own business and what we teach inside of Leah is three-dimensional qualification process. And it's really simple. Price certainly matters at some point, okay? But in the beginning, it actually matters almost zero. What I've learned after 928 plus land deals personally from my own business is that every seller, and it makes sense, every seller is going to want the highest price possible initially. Wouldn't you do the same thing? Like, even if you needed to sell relatively quickly, you're still going to try to get as much as you can, because who knows? I might just be the sucker that, grossly overpays for the property. And even if you're willing to quickly get negotiated down, you'd also don't want to reveal, if you're the landowner, how motivated you are, right? There's actually an incentive not to do that. If you talk to a landowner and they say, I need to fucking sell tomorrow and I literally will take anything, again, just simple psychology, the landowner knows I'm just going to get beat up on price. Like, this person's going to try to give me the smallest offer possible. So put yourself in their shoes. You would do the exact same thing. So if that's true, then we can all agree that just quickly judging someone off of the price that they initially want is super stupid. And I think that this is part of the reason that you see so many land investors saying, my marketing campaign didn't work, I'm not getting deals, da 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 da. It's like, no. You just actually don't know how to spot a qualified lead. And therefore, you're not spending enough time with the leads that matter. You're writing people off, and then you're sitting on your hands and saying, what should I do with my time? Or let me go send more marketing. And the greatest risk to you in the first 12 months of your land journey is marketing. Now, ironic because we make money through marketing, but actually, if you look at most beginners, they lose money on marketing campaigns. Marketing is their greatest risk in the beginning. And that's because most people are woefully undereducated. I mean, they're either learning from YouTube videos like this and thinking they can piece together the business, or they're learning from, Tweedledee and Tweedledum who just don't even run the business anymore, or have very little context in the space. And so that's the case, you're ill-equipped to go and send marketing and compete with people like me, to be honest. Like, you're going up against other sharks. So if you're not equipped correctly, you're going to feel the pain of that. Anyways, we want to be mindful of all this stuff, obviously. So let's think about how this works. And I'm going to show you guys an example of what can happen when you actually put this process into place. Okay. So the first thing that we think about is really simple. And I'm just going to use abbreviations because it's really hard for me to write words with this, is E for engagement. So that's the first thing that we want to think about. Imagine a seller that wants a really high price, but they're super engaged. There's a disconnect there. And it's that kind of cognitive dissonance between what they're saying and what they're doing. That is what we're looking for, right? Words and behaviors are not lining up. That means typically that there's some level of motivation. For example, if you're talking to a seller, they want $1 million. You say, I can only do 500. And then they call you the next day. And then they respond to all of your texts. And you're still talking to them 3 months later, and they're prompt in their responses, they're thorough in their responses, they call you, they're engaged. Something's not lining up here, right? And so you want to sniff that stuff out, that cognitive disconnect or dissonance, okay? The next thing we're going to call PB. not for Pacific Beach where I used to live, but PB for property backstory. So you like inside of Land Insights, when you're looking at the property's card, you're looking at the history of the property, the chain of title, what's happened, who's owned it, what are they paid, where do they live, what's the tax situation, are there liens, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When you're looking at that, it's actually telling you a story. Now, can I just judge a seller off of one of these points and isolate them? No. This really all comes together when you're balancing all three of these points that we'll talk about here, okay? So that property backstory is going to say things like, what's the length of ownership? Do they live out of state? Are they behind on taxes? What did they pay for it? Was it a family transfer? Do they live next to the property? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so when you balance those things, for example, the seller wants $1 million, you offered 500, but they're engaged in the process. They've owned it for 20 years, and it was a family inheritance property, so they have less of a basis in the property, less of an investment in the property. Okay, interesting. Now maybe layer on the fact that maybe there's an HOA lien or there's back taxes, and those things don't always have to be there, but these are all little breadcrumbs. And what we're trying to do here is just accurately assess the situation, right? We're not trying to use this information to manipulate or like beat the seller up or anything like that. No, we're using this information to say, is it worth proceeding with the seller? Because you don't know this yet, but I can promise you generating leads in this business is actually really easy. The hard thing though is knowing what leads should you spend time with. That's really tricky. Who should you give your time with? If I gave you 100 leads tomorrow, you couldn't equally spend your time with all of them. That would be unreasonable and ineffective. And then you also shouldn't do what every other land investor does, which is spend no time with any of them. We got to take the path somewhere in the middle, spend time with the right ones. Okay. So that's the goal of all this. The third point is a very special Sumner Healey, I guess, original, if you will. Okay. And it's so hard to type with this or write with this. I apologize. I'm using my mouth pad. My mouth pad. I sound like Mike Tyson. It's what I call the 3 whys. Okay. This is a set of questions that we wanted to go through with the seller. And there's a lot of ways to do this. It's not always linear. You don't interrogate them, but is to understand, why do you want to sell now? Simple question, really. But most land investors get off a call with a seller and they don't even understand that. So why do you want to sell now? Hey, why haven't you sold before? Was it because no one's ever made you an offer, or you didn't like the offers, or there was no reason to sell 6 months ago, but now something's changed? And then the last point is, well, if you do want to sell, why not just work with a realtor, or why not list it yourself? Okay. Now, to be clear, you don't always get simple answers. Sometimes you have to kind of intuit and read between the lines. Sometimes you have to ask multiple times. And sometimes you only get 2 out of the 3, but you can kind of piece them together because they all reinforce one another to some extent, right? And so it's when you take this full sequence of data points that you can then determine if someone's hot, warm, cold, nurture, etc. And so, yes, we want to make offers. Yes, we think about price. Yes, it kind of matters. But the interesting thing is, if we look at our land business 2026, okay, we're on track to do 144 deals per our KPI sheet. It's what we're on track to do by the end of this year. And literally, almost every single deal, I would say something like whatever, 95, 97% of every single deal that we do, I went through and looked at a lot of them this year. The first pass, the seller always wanted way higher than our offer, way higher, like sometimes like 5 times our offer. So when you just come to expect that, it doesn't shock you anymore. And we don't look at it as like, oh, throw the baby out with the bathwater, the deal's dead. We say, okay, we're not agreeing on price. So what's going on over here, right? Now, some percentage, 3% or whatever of our deals, the seller comes in and they set the price and they set a really low price for whatever reason, or they immediately accept our offer. Sometimes that happens, but it's like the slight minority of situations. The interesting thing is people have that as the expectation of what's normal. So when they don't see that, they run for the hills and they say this isn't working or these leads aren't good. It rarely ever is your leads. It's almost always you. You are the common denominator. And it's partially because you're just ill-equipped. Like you don't have the right access to information, support, education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. or you're operating through this kind of lens of hubris, which is I'm smart, I'm cool, I've been successful before, or I've watched a lot of YouTube videos, I can piece it together. That's just not true anymore. Like if you're saying that, you're deluding yourself and you're running a much larger risk by putting marketing dollars out there than you might realize. More people leave this business than actually make it in this business. And most of these people that don't make it have either never spent a dollar on education. That just is kind of crazy to me. They'll spend money on marketing, but they won't invest in education. Or they've gotten educated from people that just don't know the business, right? And so, kind of case in point, this Leah member here, Josh Pierce, amazing guy, right? Amazing guy. He shared this at Q1 of this year. Josh was a fitness coach before joining Leah. He was selling online fitness coaching as his own business. So he already understood business. He already understood sales and things along those lines. And, when he came in, his goal was 200K a month. That was always his North Star. And in March, they got there, right? 233K in 1 month, about 2 years in at that point, which is pretty incredible. And so they just kind of reverse engineered what they need to do to make that happen, right? About 12 contracts per month. But if you want a business like that, you have to understand that it's actually not just about volume. You might think, well, Josh is probably generating 1,000 leads a month. No, actually, no. Like someone like Josh, yes, there's a threshold of how many leads that you need, and we want good leads as best as possible. But what someone like Josh is really good at is running the acquisition process. We'll call that AP, right? And this is part of the bedrock of what we teach inside of Leah. We built an acquisition process that you can't learn anywhere else. There's not one coach, one YouTube video, one person that will teach you the approach that we use that produces results like this and results in our business. And of course, results are never guaranteed. Don't look at something like Josh's win and say, I will do the same thing in 2 years. Everyone is unique, and there's of course a timeline element of luck. Some people get results really quickly, sometimes it takes time. So don't fall victim to the trap of like, oh, that must be exactly how my story is going to play out. Anyways, when we think about the acquisition process, of course, it's, what do we say on the calls? How do we make our offers? How do we follow up? All of that stuff, totally relevant. But I would argue that the actual bedrock of all of it is the PQ. The PQ is the pre-qualification process. And that's exactly what we've talked about here. Someone like Josh, for example, that's doing numbers like that inside of Leah, they are not just not underwriting, but just pre-qualifying leads based off of price. They're looking at it three-dimensionally. And then they're going very deep with the right people, right? And then they're just putting the people that aren't the right fit on the back burner, right? Okay, we don't spend as much time there. Because the best deals do take time to put together. There is a sales cycle to this business. Weeks is quick, months is realistic, and sometimes it's years to put together a deal. And so it's like, how do you know if it's worth continuing spending that much time with the seller if you haven't thoroughly pre-qualified them? So anyways, guys, hope this helps. Peace and love. If you want to learn how people like Josh are building businesses like this, just go over to landinvestor.co/YouTube. We just opened up the ability to do a 90-day game plan call with their team. It's free. We've had a bunch of people sign up in the last week. It's been really fun. So you can go to that link. It'll be in the description. See ya.